Hello, everybody over there in Mumbai. Well, yes, I just wanted to share with you a little bit the design brief, or maybe not so much of a design brief, more design inspirations, and some of the things that we either have done in the last year in the Masters of Advanced Architecture here at the IAAC, or things that we have been inspired by, some reference projects that we really enjoy. First of all, Dipal, can you just verify that you can hear me okay? Okay, very good. So basically, yes, there's these four main areas that we consider quite important for self-sufficient habitats. One of them, of course, being all of these are very broad topics: energy, food, objects, and knowledge. But really, it's the accessibility to these things that we feel are what makes a self-sufficient habitat, or the accessibility to the production of these things. So here, this presentation was created by Dori Sadan. He's one of our students who just graduated, and I've asked him to put together just some reference projects and things that kind of discuss these topics. So we'll see kind of a little chapter from each of these. Okay, so we'll start with energy here, and I mean, actually, a lot of the times, what we've heard this word problem come up several times, and actually, it's one of the first things that we try to address in the master's program is that kind of when you are thinking of saying the word problem, you know, when you're trying to identify as an architect or as a designer or as an engineer, you know, when you hear problem, I think the first thing we try to do is to change this mindset and have people think of opportunity. Okay, really, it's a very simple change, a very simple shift, but I think it's important with the kind of attitude we have towards the projects. So although here Dori has put how to set up the problem of energy, I think it's more important to think about what's this opportunity. These are some statistics that he kind of grabbed that are very readily available, and one of them being let's say the access to the main source of energy that we use now, which is petroleum-based energy sources. And many analysts agree that we've reached the peak of our oil production, and this is a resource that will quickly become something that we cannot rely on anymore. So this is an obvious issue and an obvious opportunity here to look for alternative energy sources, and not just, you know, the ones that we typically think of as, you know, solar energy, to a certain extent wind energy, but also really interesting things that are emerging in the use of energy. Also, yeah, down below is a graph of just the electricity use, and it really hasn't waned or hasn't gone down. We seem to always need more electricity, more devices. So this is something we have to address. Now, on both fronts, and actually on all of the topics that we've discussed, one of the interesting things is to not just say, okay, we have an issue, we need to do something to change, we need to do some physical things to change, but also we have to imagine that there's probably a mentality of, there's probably let's say an attitude that first, we don't recognize the fact that we are actually wasting a lot of this energy, or maybe we're making devices that aren't so energy efficient. So before we start to even think about really deploying alternative energies, we should kind of first look at the way that we use it. So this kind of came out last night when we were talking about food with Chef Paco Morales, and we were asking him about, you know, urban agriculture and how we can, you know, make our cities more productive in terms of food. And he's like, look, before we have this discussion, we should really recognize the fact that we waste tons and tons of food every day. So until we change this, it's kind of difficult for me to, it was difficult for him to sort of discuss how we can, transform our urban spaces into productive food, urban agriculture kind of situations. So I think this is also an interesting point that there's a lot of work that we can do to change our own ways of using energy. So two projects here that we see, one of them is called The Jungle, and this was actually the project by the student Dori Sadan himself. Actually, not himself, he was in a team, but this was for Self-Sufficient Buildings Studio. Both of these projects had different sort of things that they needed to resolve, but they all needed to implement a kind of energy source along with an economic program, etc. So they needed several different elements to the project, and here we're just showing the kind of energy sources used by these two projects. Dodi's project, The Jungle, eventually was using this kind of algae mesh throughout the whole project that served as the battery and the way to transform sunlight, not just through photovoltaics, but actually in this case through algae metabolism into energy. So this was their battery source, and down below, this is a project by Robert Garita, Mauricio Valenzuela, Ale de Leon, and Aldo Solazzo. Their project was called Social Innovation Incubator, and again, we're not showing the whole project here. Actually, what we're showing is the energy source, and these guys were working with salt batteries, which is really interesting. That actually, with a very simple setup, you can ionize salt and create some energy from it. Of course, on a larger scale, this would have to be a much larger scale to actually be useful. Can you still hear me over all of the discussion that's happening in the background? It's getting a little bit louder here as the students arrive. Anyways, another energy here case study is by a group of, this is maybe a little bit more, now it's weird to say, but it's a little bit more traditional, no? I mean, this is an energy source that we're all used to, solar panels, but this is a group called Ecomaterico. They're a group of two Italians and a Mexican guy who actually I studied with, but their expertise is into creating really lightweight structures, but also retrofitting existing infrastructure with alternative energy sources. In this case, this is a pavilion for the solar panel manufacturer, which is just a fun, light structure, but creates a good amount of energy. So this kind of thing could really be deployed anywhere as a quick electrical bike charging station or any other sort of device. So these are the kinds of things that maybe nowadays, funny enough, seem to be a little bit more traditional. Similar to the Endesa Pavilion by IAAC, this was kind of our second solar house. This was, let's say, designed at IAAC with the guidance of Rodrigo Rubio, who is a faculty here. He was also the architect on the architectural team of the first solar house for the Solar Decathlon. And here, more so than just the fact that the house produces its own energy and actually produces more energy than it needs, there was also quite a lot of study here done about the assembly of the house, how the house comes together, how the house actually is manufactured, where the materials are sourced. So, energy here is, not just putting solar panels in right orientation, but it's also about the embodiment, let's say the life cycle of all the materials, the sourcing of all the materials, etc. So it's also important to think that energy can be energy is embedded in materials, so this is also something that we need to consider. So the next sort of chapter, the next sort of theme that we are interested in exploring is the issues with food production. As our, this graph is showing from 1960 to today, so that's actually, we could expand this much more, but again, it's a simple relationship between population growth over time, and as the population grows, we can assume that, the demand for food is going to be much greater. seems to be both energy and food production are getting farther and farther away from our urban environments for good reasons, and but also creates an issue that, you know, maybe we're getting our bananas from, I don't know, South America here in Spain. Actually, we have good bananas from the Canary Islands. But it's just to serve a point that we are no longer, let's say, producing the majority of the food where we are. We're seem to be getting it from places around. I don't know exactly what the reality is in Mumbai with this, but it would be interesting to hear this. So this is just again another opportunity to realize, well, how can we take on this challenge and actually implement it in our urban environments? And there's a very big trend in, you know, community gardens and urban orchards, even projects such as this project, this urban farm for the PS1 program in New York, was dealing with the production of food in urban environments. Now, last night when we had this discussion with Chef Papa Morales, you know, this is when the kind of discussion about the waste of food and all of these things came to mind. But also he was mentioning, and I think rightly so, that these kinds of urban farming programs still tend to be a bit elitist. I mean, when maybe, you know, again, this is something I'd like to hear about in the reality of in Mumbai. But, you know, the topic of organic food, the topic of slow food, all of these things tend to be much more expensive than the food that we have accessible to us via supermarkets, via markets. So his comment on this was, this trend is great to be, you know, converting our you know, bringing this back into our urban environments is fantastic. But we also, at the moment, need to go beyond this sort of elitist, very selective sort of access to this and allow it to be more general, more accessible to the whole population. So I think this is also well-placed comment, along with the fact that we have to change the mentality of how much food we actually waste. But nonetheless, we also had a good discussion last night with Maria Ayalova, and she was projecting 100 years into the future this idea of how to create a more productive New York. In 1776, she showed a map of New York and how productive the amount of productive area on Manhattan Island was enormous. Today we have almost zero productive land area in Manhattan. I mean, productive area in terms of agricultural production. And so they have kind of a vision for 2110, I guess. The year 2110, where it would return to kind of very dense skyscrapers with more productive land. So this is an interesting vision to have as well. Now, in terms of the topic of knowledge, Dori kind of had a nice reference here, which I'll put up. I don't know if you've seen this, but let me put the link here so you guys can see what it is. This is a website called We Are Data. It's actually a promotional website for a video game where a detective uses social media to solve crimes. But in any case, instead of showing an issue with knowledge, which of course we do have great issues with the access to information and education, he also wanted to point out that there's so much information that we already create. I mean, all of us, anytime we use a cell phone, anytime that we move around the city and we have a GPS location, we're somehow generating information. Anytime we use public transportation, anytime we use Facebook, Twitter, etc., all of this becomes information somewhere out there. And this platform, We Are Data, just makes this a reality. So here we're seeing an overlaying of, let me turn the music on here. We're seeing an overlaying of, for example, where people tweet from, where there are mobile phone towers. Here we have public bicycle stations. You can actually see in real time, you can see the metro station, or the train. Here we're looking at Paris Metro live and how this is moving through the city. So I think it's just an interesting, and you also see traffic lights. This is all the sort of publicly available information, free, let's say not even information. Right now it's data. And so we have Wi-Fi hotspots, internet relays, electromagnetic fields. I don't know what all these things exactly mean. But I guess what Dodi was trying to say with this is the kind of situation today. I mean, we have access to all this information. We're constantly generating all this information. And it's really up to us to sort of render it and do something useful with it. Let me go back here to the presentation. And along with this, he puts up a reference of a project that was done here called Event Cloud, which was trying to make a material space, or let's say a physical space, out of immaterial data from tweets. So it's trying to render the popularity of a place physically with using the Twitter API to connect different places based on what people are doing, the activities that are going on, etc. So down below, more than anything, you can see kind of a rendering of what this would look like using a kind of a projection system, etc. So this is an interesting, let's say, look at how just a simple bit of information, just using people's Twitter feeds, public social networking, to render popularity, render events, render things physically. So bringing the virtual world back into the physical world. And well, of course, in terms of continuing knowledge here, this is a kind of a library that's in Tel Aviv that just essentially is a wall with books that pops up, and you can have events there. You can share knowledge. You can do small kind of interventions. So this was to kind of show that the issue of knowledge, while it's an education, is a great opportunity. There are very almost lightweight solutions to it. I mean, these kinds of distributed libraries could be a really light way to do this. This is another, I think, funny example, which is called Biblia Burro. This is in Colombia, and this gentleman has a couple of donkeys, and he brings this library to very rural and remote places around Colombia. So again, huge topic, the topic of education, but there are some really innovative and creative things that people are doing to bring information and bring knowledge to remote areas. So yes, of course, we can think of, okay, well, we need to build a school, but do we really need to build a school, or do we need to provide different ways to access information? So this was another kind of a case study, a really interesting reference for us, because it's something also temporary. So throughout time, that it starts to mark events. Same with this kind of Levinsky Library in Tel Aviv. And finally, well, not finally, but there's a few more topics here. But one of the last, this kind of topic of objects was sparked by a few different things. Here we have an image of a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, and I don't know if you can zoom in on it here. I'll zoom in a little bit on it here. But what it's showing here is that the Dreamliner is constructed, it's built in, I don't know, more than 10 different countries, which, it's interesting. It's an interesting example of industrialization, that, you can build this thing in so many different places and bring it together and it still works. But it seems kind of absurd that we need such infrastructure to build eventually what is aggregation of objects. So I guess what we're saying is here is how can we bring back production locally, and what are the opportunities for local production of our everyday objects. Of course, we have the example of the Fab Lab network, and not just the Fab Lab network, but any sort of space like this that is popping up that seem to be popping up everywhere, which is essentially like-minded individuals that have access to certain machines that eventually they share with people. They share as well knowledge about how to create things, the techniques for building these kind of things. Here in magenta, as you can see, it's just a kind of the program from last month, the different kinds of workshops that were done, things dealing with Arduino, things dealing, make your own speaker, make your own skateboard, talking about the Smart Citizen platform. Do you like to do 3D printing? Do you want to make your own 3D printer? So these places, while they are focused on actually creating objects, of course, all of the topics that we're talking about are interrelated. So I mean, there's a lot of ties here with the idea of knowledge and education. Teaching people how to be more self-sufficient by giving them access to their own ways of making. Okay. Of course, there's also energy is also a part of this, but really this example here is a good example of how knowledge and objects are really tied together. And in all of this, we have kind of a social activation agenda. I mean, it seems all of these things are ways that people come together. So it's almost embedded into the topic itself. We don't, I mean, yes, of course, we think about this element, but all of the topics seem to have this element of social as an embedded element into the topics. These are some projects by a group called Ecosistema Urbano. They're out of Madrid. And they do all sorts of really fun, sometimes even like guerrilla projects, where they just maybe invade a public space and do something to activate it. We don't have it here, but there was one project in Madrid which was just an urban beach. I mean, Madrid is landlocked. There's no access to actual water. So they took a public place, a small little public plaza, and they just brought in a bunch of sand and created a beach for a few days before the city eventually gave them a fine for it. They really activated. I mean, it was really a really popular thing with the neighbors, etc. This is another kind of way that you can activate communities here via design and via objects. So this is a project called Bloom by Alyssa Andrasek and Jose Sanchez, in which they allow people to design these kind of pink objects, and then kind of work together to create their own puzzle piece, their own puzzle conglomeration with these pieces. So it's really something that anybody can do, and it's a way to create community, a way to bring people together. Just a community building something is really a strong force. Another example here that maybe talks about a little bit energy, a little bit different kinds of resources, and also social activation and social knowledge is the example by Cloud9. This is the Thirst Pavilion, which is actually a pavilion that was created for what do you call this? A fair, not a fair. It's it was a fair on water. The theme was water, and here in this case, the architect was actually shooting salt water from these little bubbles. In the end, they were not able to shoot salt water because salt water is not very nice when we get it in our eyes. But the idea was that over time, the salt would dry on the surface of this and create a new skin that eventually, when it rained, the salt would dissolve away. So it was a little bit to make people aware of the access to clean water, that actually, most of our water resources on the planet are salt water. So it was a really interesting example of how to push knowledge about an issue through an architectural design. Okay. Finally, I wanted to show here an example. I'll give you the link here. Of kind of the intersection of a lot of these things. It's the intersection of energy, the intersection of knowledge, data, information, intersection about kind of objects, and intersection about, in a slightly different way, food. But this is the Talking Tree project. So this is actually a tree somewhere in the world that has all sorts of, it has accounts on Facebook. It has accounts on Twitter, so it tweets, it records sound, it takes pictures. It can tell you about the air quality. So it's sort of the personification of a tree with all of these things that we've been talking about. So it's just a kind of a way to make people aware, or kind of try to imagine what a tree in our urban environments would be thinking about if it had sensors and it was feeding on Twitter. So this is just again, it's not really a design brief. It's more of a just an inspiration guide. Some of the things that we feel are important. It also is a guide to the 4 topics which we feel are important to self-sufficiency, and really it just served as a way for our participants to get their heads into these different alternative ways of producing energy, different ways that knowledge could be actually embedded into projects. Yeah, I mean, just an overview, let's say, of the projects that we feel are relevant. Of course, there are many other projects that we can include here, but these are just a few of the ones that we wanted to show our participants. Yeah, if you guys have some questions about these projects, anything further you'd like to know about these, any pressing issues over there? I mean, I'd be curious to hear how it is you guys are working with with the topic of mobility over there. Eventually, we have some time a little bit later on to. Istanbul has requested some time around 1 o'clock, I think, 1 o'clock to discuss what they're doing in Istanbul. If you want, maybe we can also take the opportunity for that time to show maybe a little bit of what's going on with your topic of transportation and mobility.